If it is clear what I was saying about the existence of within industry heterogeneity, what is Perrot's approach? So Perrot basically see the firm as I was saying, as a bundle of two things: resources and competences. Okay, resources are defined as the stocks of available factors, which can be both tangible and intangible, that are owned and controlled by the organization. So notice that the way in which she defines resources reminds somehow factors of production, like in the standard neoclassical approach, like capital and labor. Of course, but her approach to this is somewhat broader. Okay, so of course you can have tangible factors of production, like again capitals, machines, and workers, so labor. But you can also have intangibles. What are, for instance, intangible resources? Well, knowledge, skills that can be in the head of the worker, or managerial knowledge, meaning the knowledge that managers have about how to organize in production activities. All these things are kind of intangible resources that, however, can play an important role in defining what a firm is doing, that are completely neglected by the standard neoclassical approach, as well as by the transaction cost approach. The second component of a firm, that characterize a firm, is what she called competences and capabilities. What are competences and capabilities? Are basically organization capacity to deploy such resources. So what differentiates one firm from another is not only the resources that the firm own, but also the capability that each firm has to make use of these resources. And it is actually this, the capability of the firm to make use of these resources, that grant some degree of competitive advantage to these firms. Okay. Later on, after Penrose, there has been some further contribution within this stream of research, in particular an important paper by Gary Pisano, Thies, and another author which I don't remember, which extends a little bit this approach, introducing also the concepts of dynamic capabilities, which means sort of like the idea here is that you make a sort of dynamic the idea of competences. So what matters is not only the capability of the firm to deploy resources, but also the firm's ability to integrate, build, and reconfigure competences to address rapidly changing environments. So, in a sense here, the idea is that it's not only the capability of the firm now to deploy the resources that the firm owns to create competitive advantage. What is important also is the capability of the firm to adapt to the context in which the firm operates, to the surrounding environment, which is oftentimes rapidly changing, and it is actually this capability to adapt through the creation of new competences and new capabilities that defines the firm ability to be competitive. Just to give an example that can be useful to understand. Can be also related to what we will do in the second part of the class. One good example of dynamic capabilities is how firm reacted to the shock caused by the COVID lockdown. Okay, so put yourself into the in place of a manager of a company that at the end of March receive the obligation to sort of like either close down the activity or to find out the way to allow the employees of the company to work from home using different technologies like smart working and things like that. Okay, so for many firms, in particular for many Italian firms, we know, and I will give you some more data about this in the second part of the class, that this was not a very easy choice. Okay, it was not a very easy choice because no firm were ready to organize and to switch and to change the organization of their activities from the standard way of doing to a new context in which they were required to adopt smart working practices. Okay, because they didn't know the technology that was needed, because they even if they knew the technology, they couldn't apply it to their organization, things like that. So Some firms managed to do this and were relatively fast in doing this. And why some firms managed and other firms didn't manage? Well, one possible explanation is actually the idea of dynamic capabilities. So the firm that managed to adjust to the new context in a relatively rapid way, changing the way in which they were organizing their activities, are firms that in a certain way can be defined as having better or more better dynamic capabilities. Okay, so a better way of adapting their work practices, the management of their activities to new and rapidly changing conditions. Okay, and of course, the more we live in a world that is complex, that have in which every year there is a kind of a crisis or a kind of a shock, of course, the dynamic capabilities become very important to create and sustain your competitive advantage. Okay, is it clear? Questions? Me again. I'm sometimes I speak a bit fast, probably, but as you probably guess, you've guessed, I really I like this theory. I'm actually using it also in my research. So I'm a bit too enthusiastic about this, and therefore I want to tell you more things that my knowledge of English allows me to do. So I can be sometimes not very clear, but I hope this was, as a first introduction, was sufficiently clear. If there are no questions and no doubts, I can just proceed further. So the approach of Penrose is extend the neoclassical approach by considering resources and capabilities, and on top of this, Thies, Pisano, and others add the idea of dynamic capabilities. Okay. Now, what are the main characteristics of this theory? Now, the main features are the following. First of all, that, as I was already telling you, a key role in understanding what firms do is played by the internal development of competences and resources via individual and organizational learning. So here the idea is what? Is something, again, that is completely neglected by the neoclassical approach. Why? Because as I was saying, the classical approach considers only factors of production. In Penrose's approach, you do have factors of production, physical ones, but you also have intangible factors of production as resources, and you also have competences, okay? Your capability of organizing these resources. Now, this capability is not given, but changes over time via learning. So if you start up, if in a startup, okay, you create a new business, you hire people, you buy machines, you have a manager that has some idea of how to organize activities, and then you start a business. Okay, then after 1 or 2 years of activity, of course, probably you realize that you can do things better, that you can organize your activities in a better way. So this is a kind of organizational learning that takes place at the firm level, which affects, of course, your capability of organizing resources. So, sorry, I just stopped because the quality of the network went down a bit. I hope now it goes up again. Okay, now should be fine again. I'm sorry if sometime again I interrupt myself because the quality of the network goes down. So in a sense, the idea of organizational learning, it implies basically that competences and resources are not given, but are accumulated over time via learning, because again, you can change the way in which you do things. Secondly, this is also an important factor, competences and resources are firm specific, which implies they are difficult to transfer. The idea, for instance, is that when you hire a worker and these workers start to work for your business, for your company, at the beginning, this worker has some skills that are maybe useful for your business for some reason, which can be, if you want, sort of like general, so they can be useful for many different firms. However, the more the worker works for your company, the more the skills that this worker has in his or her head adapt to the characteristics of the company and become somewhat of like firm specific. Okay, so become specific to your business, specific to your company, because he or she learns how to do things in the way in which the company want his or want him or her to do things. Okay, so the worker adapts the skill to the characteristics of the company, and in this sense, the skills become firm specific. When the skills are firm specific, it also implies that if my worker move from my company to another company, this movement is not as easy as it is sometimes assumed by the standard theory, because these skills need to be adjusted to the characteristics of the new company where the worker goes. So I don't know if any of you has had any kind of experience in a real company, but this happens oftentimes. Okay, when there is in a company a new hire, meaning a new person that is hired by the company, usually this person, independently of the level of the hierarchy in which this new hire is made, it can be at the bottom of the hierarchy, or it can be the manager, or even the CEO of the company. At the beginning, this new worker, this new employee, goes through a period of sort of like learning, in which he or she needs to learn how the things are organized and done in this company. So in a certain sense, she or he needs to acquire some firm-specific knowledge about how things are organized within a given company. Okay, and this is something that again usually is neglected by standard theory. Finally, and this is another important point, but I mentioned this already before, the characteristics of your resources and also the characteristics of your competences or capabilities, meaning your capability of deploying these resources, is actually the main source of competitive advantage. Okay, so it's the combination of these two things that creates competitive advantage for firm. And this is also a big change with respect to the classical approach, or even the transaction cost approach, where instead all the idea is about minimizing cost, okay, as the main competitive advantage, as something that grants the firm a competitive advantage. In this approach, you may clearly have that you can have very expensive resources because you hire high quality workers and expensive machine, which implies that you have high costs. But if you have very good competences, meaning you have very good managers that allows you to manage in a proper way all these resources, you can still create a competitive advantage, even if you have high costs. Maybe because you base your competitive advantage, again, on quality of production, or in the efficiency, on the basis of the efficiency with which you can organize your activities.